given that mandate, it's important that they make sure that we do not manipulate prices as a group to shift profits from Nigeria to elsewhere. So there's a need for them to protect the tax base. If you understand that, then you understand why they are doing what they are doing. The B part talks about the fact that they need the tools to be able to achieve A. So if you understand that they need some tools to do that, then you also understand why they are doing what they are doing in terms of making revisions to the regulations. So if there's a penalty, maybe it's because they need those tools to be able to effectively do it. All right? But the good thing is they recognize that in the transfer pricing regime, tax administrators are not the only stakeholders. There's also taxpayers. So if you look at C, D, and E, it actually looks at protecting the taxpayer, whilst tax administrators try to achieve A and B. So C talks about the fact that the regulation should reduce the incidence of double taxation risk. So any revision or update that is contrary to that, I'm going to try and have a conversation with my good friend as to why are we doing something contrary to the objective or the purpose of the regulation. So any revision should not lead to an increase in the double taxation risk for taxpayers because it's there to protect your interest. The D part talks about a level playing field for multinational enterprises and domestic group entities. So if there's any new regulation that leads to an imbalance, we're going to bring it up. And the final one, and my most important one, is clarity in the treatment of transfer pricing issues. We all know how ambiguous transfer pricing as a practice is. So it's important that we always have clarity. So wherever there's a revision to the regulation, that leads to, first and foremost, an ambiguity in terms of its interpretation or its application, we need to go back to the architect and ask, okay, why? Or if there's any regulation that is going to lead to an arbitrary application, then we're going to question. So today, what we're going to do first and foremost is call on the architect of these revised regulations to tell us about the what and the how. Then we'll also have an opportunity where the panelists will come here and talk about how and the why. So without much ado, please brace yourself, be ready. This is going to be an exciting time. I call this TP Sensitization 101. It's going to fly soon, and be sure to interact and participate because there's a lot you're going to learn, and you leave here being a TP expert. Thank you very much. Now, I've been given the honor to introduce the guest speaker of today. This guest speaker, I'm going to tell you, I believe is my personal friend from a professional perspective. Since I came to this market, I had some kind of advantage of having done transfer pricing in different jurisdictions. But the good news is anytime I've engaged our guest speaker on issues concerning transfer pricing, I believe that we both leave learning a lot of things from each other. I've learned so much from him because he always opens his doors for us to come in and have a discussion about TP issues. He recognizes that TP is a very complex area and no one person has answers to it all. And because of that, he always opens his doors for any discussion that we have. And that's the reason why I see him as a friend. There's a short profile on him, so I have to read it, but that was my viewpoint. So our guest speaker is by name Mr. Matthew O. Bonjubola. He's a highly experienced chartered accountant and a consummate tax professional. He started his tax career in the tax audit department of the FIRS, from where he moved to the tax investigation and tax policy department. He currently heads the international tax division of the FIRS and has led the development of a robust TP department that has quickly become one of the largest in terms of personnel in Africa. I personally have to agree that although Nigeria was late in the game in terms of coming out with TP regulations, today I can tell you, for me, it's arguably the #1 TP regime across Africa. South Africa had their TP regulations enacted far back in 1995. Their personnel strength is about 25 personnel in TP. Kenya had it in 2006. I think we've surpassed them. Zambia had it in 1999. They have not done much with it. So if you look at it, although they came late in the game, our guest speaker has changed the game. Without much ado, I call up to the stage Mr. Matthew O. Bonjubola.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. And please just ignore all that just has said about me. Because it's my friend, and my friends don't lie. So I won't say what he has said is not true. But just take it simply that we have a team of committed persons who are very passionate about our country, about our processes, and who are also willing to learn as we do the business. Quite a number of things he has raised in his short presentation, and they are very germane. Why are we doing what we are doing? Hopefully I'll be able to cover some of those in my presentation. And I will also want to apologize upfront because I'm also pressed for time. I have another event for 10 o'clock this morning. I'll probably just run a little bit beyond 10 o'clock before I leave. So if I have the presentation loaded on, I can quickly run through that, take a couple of questions, and then I'm sure the panel will be able to follow through any gaps that I might have left behind. Okay. You want to give us the screen view? Yeah, thank you. Okay, we just run through this few slides. These are the things we're going to be looking at in the course of this presentation. And maybe the starting point for us is to ask ourselves, how far have we fared since we started this journey sometimes in 2012, when the first transfer pricing regulation was published. And actually, about a year thereafter, we set up a unit to undertake the transfer pricing functions. And in 2014, I'm sure some of us will recall that the service went around the whole country trying to enlighten the public of the takeoff of the transfer pricing regime. And actually, TP audit commenced in 2015. And to date, we already have about 200 cases at different stages of the throughput. And we have closed quite a number of cases. Recovery had been very staggering, and that is the truth. And we already have about 20-something cases in court, just in this very short space that we started. And of course, we are discussing the new regulation that came up a few weeks ago. Now, putting transfer pricing reforms in context, trying to answer the question why. Part of what my colleague and friend said in his speech. I'm sure we all remember that sometimes in 2007, 2008, the whole world economy went into a big recession, if it was not really a blowout for us. And coming out of that, three major things arose. One was the G20 countries coming together and saying, we've got to protect our revenue. And so in 2013, there was a project called the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting. And also, the developed world came together to say, we can't continue to give people money. So the issue of Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG, therefore came up at the level of the United Nations. I'm sure we still remember our brother who passed on not too long ago, Kofi Annan, came up with the issue of Sustainable Development Goals to say that we should have growth in the developing economies, but they must fund their own budget by themselves. And so it came with a twin brother. And the twin brother of that is a domestic revenue mobilization program. And then the third thing that came was different countries doing different things to boost their own revenue and economy. And so when we look at the base erosion and profit shifting, what was it all about? It's all about harmonizing tax rules globally. I mean, because it was recognized that multinational companies have taken over the economy of the world. And if you look at the statistics, they are doing about 70% of all the businesses of the world are done within multinationals. And therefore, the rules must more or less mirror each other so as to eliminate uncertainties and to ensure that everybody knows what is going to be the outcome in any transaction. So there was that priority of harmonizing tax rules globally. There was also the issue of increasing collaborations among tax authorities. And this speaks to the issue of exchange of information, whether it is spontaneous, whether it's on request, whether it's automatic. It also talks about the BEPS inclusive framework, whereby the G20 recognizing that it does not represent the whole world. I mean, the G20 countries do not make up the whole world. That even those other countries that are developing are part of the whole world. And that was why in 2014, developing countries were invited to join the BEPS program, which eventually led to the formation of the BEPS inclusive framework. And then there was the global battle against harmful tax practices. I'm sure we are very conversant with the term race to the bottom, where countries were competing against each other with tax incentives thrown up and down and really destroying the tax space, which has promoted, as it were, tax haven psychology in people's mind. I mean, sometimes you ask yourself, what will make somebody go and put the headquarters of his company in a country like Seychelles, which is just a small island on the Atlantic Ocean without little or no land, no industry of repute, and nothing. And then you see this $10 billion company having its headquarters there. The question is, what is the attraction? The attraction was issues of harmful tax practices, whereby we encourage people to move in their income without having to suffer taxes. And so the whole world said, no, we're not going to allow that anymore. And then lastly is to mandate sort of every jurisdiction to reform its tax system such that we can then have a predictable tax system all over the world. So that was all BEPS was all about. And then coming to the issue of the SDG and DRM, I mean, the guiding principle was that every country should raise the revenue it needs to fund its budget. I mean, that was just it. I mean, simple. And so the advanced countries said, yes, we have been giving aids to, for example, Africa. I mean, there are so many countries in Africa that depends 70-80% of their budget is funded by aids. I mean, Nigeria probably is one of the few exceptions. I mean, maybe Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya are the few exceptions you will find. You find out that most other countries in Africa depend entirely on aids. And the people giving the aid say, look, even our own economy are suffering. And so we can't keep feeding you. So you've got to feed yourself. And so what then the partners, the helpers have said this, what we are going to do is that we are going to increase our technical assistance to you. We're going to help you to develop your tax system, but you go grow your own revenue and spend your own money. And then what happened was that the partner countries decided to step up domestic revenue mobilization as a key implementing factor for the SDG, that you want to develop, go get your money. And of course, participating countries are expected to ensure policy coherence. That is, all your policies across board, whether your international or your foreign affairs policies, your economic policies, your political policies, there must be coherence, such that you are able to use everything you have to do your own programs. And of course, you must be a part of BEPS. because all of these are happening within the BEPS project. And then the third aspect of it was the reforms that are happening in other countries. I'm sure many of us will remember, not too long ago, the US, started with FATCA, and then stepped up away from FATCA and said, look, 2017 came up with a very large reform by Trump. What came out of that was BEAT, which is Base Erosion Anti-Avoidance Tax. And we have the GILTI, and then the FDII. All of these are reforms that reduce the effective tax rate in the US to 21%, but with a whole lot of other things to come with it. And then, of course, you remember the European countries creating what we call patent boxes. That is, all those entities that have moved their intangibles to countries like Seychelles, like Mauritius, like Bermuda, they're inviting them to bring those patents back home with a sweetener. And the sweetener is what we call patent boxes, just to encourage people to bring in their intangibles. And then we have issues of black or gray lists flying all over the world. I'm sure some of us will still remember the FATF blacklist of non-cooperating countries and jurisdictions. The European Union came up with one early last year, and on that list I think there were 8 African countries on it, if I recall the number now. I think it's reduced to 2 now. What that means is that we are looking at countries that are not doing well with their tax system, countries that are promoting a tax-free world, as it were. If I can put that in quotes. So countries, the very big countries are coming together to maintain this non-compliant list. And you don't want your country to be there. Because if your country is there, you may not be able to borrow money from the international monetary market. You may not be able to do certain businesses. And then, the issue of rationalization of tax incentives has become automatic. It's now automatic. And I see Nigeria in reviewing our tax laws. A lot of the incentives that we have are going to be cleaned out of the books. And then finally, is what you see is regional tax harmonization. Countries that are close by are coming together to begin to have similar tax system, such that you can't complain and say, oh, the tax system in Ghana is bad, let me come to Nigeria. No, because very soon you will see that in West Africa, our tax system are going to almost become one. For example, we have agreed a common VAT regime now. We have already agreed a tax treaty model now. We have agreed a transfer pricing legislation model now. So very soon you'll be surprised that our income tax is going to be mirroring each other. So you really can't run away. So if you are not paying in Mali, you pay in Ivory Coast. If you are not paying in Ivory Coast, you pay in Benin. Or you are not paying in Benin, you pay in Nigeria. So in one way or the other, it's going to catch up with you. And so all of this now dovetailed into the issue of taxation of multinational enterprises, the rules guiding them. And that is why issues of transfer pricing, control foreign companies, rules, permanent establishment issues, anti-avoidance issues, and so many other rules are coming on. Very soon you will see Nigeria coming up with a brand new tax rules, corporate and personal income tax rules. All of these are in the works. It's not only happening in Nigeria, just like Josh said, it's happening across the whole world, and particularly in our own part of the world in Africa. Now, as a result of the various things I have said in the previous slides, the literature for transfer pricing worldwide had changed. And the common literatures that readily comes to mind will be the OECD transfer pricing guidelines, the UN practical manual for transfer pricing, and some other regional transfer pricing literatures have changed. And the notable things that have changed there are the issues of intangibles. Before now, the moment you register a patent, you are the owner of an intangible. it is assumed that all the profit, both residual and operating, comes to you. The new rule says no. Now, just legal ownership is no longer enough for you to get all the remuneration. Those who are performing value-adding activities must be adequately remunerated. And those that are providing funding without assuming risk, they will only receive risk-free return. So if all you have done is to fund research, and you have come up with an item, no problem, and you are not the one exploiting that resource, you will only get a risk-free return for your effort. It's as good as you have put your money in your bank. Issues of commodity transactions. Now, it's been agreed globally that the cap method, that is the comparable uncontrolled price method, will be the most appropriate method for commodities. However, it has also been agreed that this could be supplemented with the use of quoted prices on exchanges, such that you don't need to be looking for perfect match, whether internal or external comparables. If you have an item that is traded on a known exchange, a publicly known exchange, then the prices quoted on such exchange could actually be your cap. And about application of the arm's length principle, here, I have a contract, it's no longer enough. Oh, we have signed a contract agreement. Now, by BEPS action number 8, it says that the actual behavior of the parties will take precedence over whatever you have in a contract agreement. So it's going to be now substance over form. And of course, contractual allocation of risk will only be accepted if we can support with facts. Another issue that was addressed is the issue of low-value added intra-group services. Again, these are defined, those are things that are not part of the core business. I mean, you maybe your enterprise is the business of petroleum exploration, for example, and somebody is supplying you with water to drink. I mean, that is not a core item within your value chain. So those are things that are defined as low value adding activities. And of course, the issue of allocation key for treating that, the issue of disclosure of pooled costs is also has come up. And then with the issue of cost contribution arrangements, again, delineating the actual transaction in a CCA is the same for any other contractual agreement. That is, actual behavior versus what you have written down in your contract. TP documentation, now we're going to speak a lot more about that in this my very short presentation. Now, instead of what we used to have as TP documentation, now the framework has followed the 3-tiered, where you have the master file, the local file, and the country by country reports. Now, what has happened in Nigeria with respect to taxation and transfer pricing? Two things have happened. Number one is that silently, tax reform is going on in Nigeria. And two is that Nigeria is more has embraced collaboration, much more than what we used to have. Now, for tax reforms, what have we done, or what are we doing, or what are we going to do? Number one is that the primary tax legislations are already being reviewed. I mean, people are already working on that as we speak. So we are hoping that by the time very soon, bills will be going to the National Assembly for enactment into law to replace our extant tax laws. We already have the country by country reports regulation, which has already been published a few months ago. We are now have the new transfer pricing regulations already published. Quite a number of guidelines have already been published, and many more have been published. I think yesterday there was a publication in newspapers as to the notifications of CBC reports. Please, if you have not read that publication, I encourage you to do so. I think I've also asked Josh, I've asked them to forward to you a copy of that publication so you can share with your clients. That's just talking about activating regulation number 6 of the CBCR regulation. So this is what is happening in the tax space in respect of tax reform in Nigeria. And I know I'm expecting somebody to ask me later on, say, oh, but all of this thing you are doing, we are not hearing about it. Yes, because we don't do tax business on the pages of newspapers. And many people have accused the service and say, look, we hear customs all the time, we hear EFCC all the time, but for us, confidentiality is the rule of the game. And that is why most often you don't hear much about taxation on the pages of newspaper, because we need to work quietly, and some of our colleagues in the practice are part of what we are doing, so only that they may not share them with you. Now, in the area of tax collaboration, what is Nigeria doing? Already we are a member, we have signed the Multilateral Tax Convention of the EU, which is already enforced in Nigeria. This makes it possible for Nigeria to exchange information, either to send or to receive, from close to 80 countries now of the world. We have ratified the country-by-country report multilateral convention of competent authorities, by next year, by 2020, we will begin to receive CBCR, and we also begin to send CBCR to other countries. We have signed the automatic exchange of information, MCA. We are already being reviewed by the Global Forum to certify us ready to receive automatic exchange of information for tax purposes. And what this means is that those of us who earn passive income outside the country, you have a savings account in Switzerland, you have royalty you get from Israel, or you have a house in Dubai where you collect rent, automatically those information is going to be fed to the Federal Revenue Service. So you don't need to come and disclose to us. If you disclose, you have done very well. If not, we will still come back and tell you this is how much you have earned, because those information will come, pieces of information will come to us automatically every month. As they credit your account for interest, the FRS is being notified that we have paid Mr. Gunjubola $20 interest on his account. And then when you make your tax returns, you don't be surprised. Before you come, the tax authority has already had more than 3/4 of your tax return prepared ahead of you. We are active member of the BEPS Inclusive Framework. Nigeria also sits as a member of the steering group of the inclusive, and actually the vice chair of the Inclusive Framework. So these are all that we are doing in collaborating with other countries to improve our tax system. Now, let me just speak very briefly about the country-by-country reporting rules. For those of us probably who had not gone through that, just have this little slide there. In Nigeria, if you look at the regulation, it modeled, or it mirrored the model legislation that was agreed to under the BEPS project. And the simple rule is that any ultimate parent company that is resident in Nigeria must file CBC with Nigeria, with the FRS, within 12 months of its accounting year end. However, a resident constituent entity that is a member of an MNE who is not the ultimate parent, who is resident in Nigeria, may be required to file CBCR in certain conditions. And what are those conditions? If where the ultimate parent is, there's no requirement to file CBCR, then it's going to come back to you to do so. Or even where that duty arises, but there is no exchange mechanism between that country and Nigeria, you will still be asked to file. And then surrogate filing is going to be allowed, that is your entity, and that's why we are asking for notification under Regulation 6. Who is going to file for your multinational? Is it going to be you? Is it going to be your parent company, or somebody somewhere else? So surrogate filing is allowed, whereby the multinational will appoint one of its entities as the surrogate parents who will do the filing. And there's a threshold, so it's not every company, it's not every multinational that's going to file a CBCR. if your combined turnover, I mean that is the whole group turnover, is 160 billion and more, then you will file the CBCR, which is about 750 million euro turnover. And of course, there are a few administrative penalties to encourage people to file. There is penalty for late filing, for example. For those who will probably not file correct report, there are also penalties. And then, because we know that multinationals operate in different countries using different languages, you are submitting in Nigeria, they are requesting that you do it in the English language. And of course, companies have started making notifications. And like I said, we had a publication yesterday to tell us how to do the notification. This is all I'm going to say in respect of the CBCR. So let's go to the, like somebody said, the big elephant, the main reason why we are gathered. Yeah, the 2018 transfer pricing regulations is that this is the citing, I mean, this is the official title. And so, what is it? Maybe because before I speak into the content, let me try and answer one more question that Josh asked. He said, how and why? I have tried to explain the why, but how did we get here? We got here for three basic reasons. One, when we started the transfer pricing regime in 2012 with the first regulations, we included some administrative penalties in the drafts. And when we did an exposure, various stakeholders came and spoke with us and said, look, don't let us start this and then we start having penalties. You know, people don't know this, so why don't we shape the issue of penalties and then let's practice it and then see how compliance will be. And of course we tried and we said, all right, and the service agreed and removed the penalties that were in there. And so in the last 5 years that we have worked with what we have, what had been our experience? Compliance rates and lastly, also drove what you have seen there is we need to be fair to all, and we must be fair to ourselves. As we are fair to other countries, we must also be fair to ourselves. So those are the three principal things that give us this. It may not be perfect, and I'm not beating my chest, it is perfect, but I can say it's a step forward. Can we improve it? Yes. Like, I mean, we have on our own, we have already started saying what we need to improve on this. So it is not static, and it's not going to be static, because the review have started all over again. Somebody said the ideal may never be achieved, but we keep working towards it. And so what have we done to the old one in this one? Is that there are additional provisions which were not in the old one that we have brought into this new one. For example, the issue of import or export of commodities was not clearly spelled out in the old regulation. Here we have devoted time to explain how we're going to treat issues of import and export of commodities. Intergroup services were not treated in the old regulation. Now we have brought clearly what are going to be the conditions for, or how are we going to treat the issues of intergroup services. We're going to be looking at, was there actually a service? If there was a service, was there a benefit? If there was a benefit, is it not supposed to be a shareholding service which you should benefit for? I mean, being a member of a group should entitle you to certain benefits without having to pay for it. If yes, you have gotten benefit, it's not a shareholding activity, then what is the total cost of that service? How many of you shared it? What is the allocation key for sharing? So now we have brought clarity into all of this. So for example, if you have a common legal service, I mean you have a centralized legal department, the question is, what is the total cost of running that service? How many of you are in the groups who benefited from that service? Are there a portion of that service that is dedicated to a specific member of that group? Whose cost you go to that? So all of those must be clearly brought to the table going forward. The issue of intangibles which were not addressed in the whole regulation had been also addressed in line with the BEPS outcome here. And this is bringing in all the whole issue of cash boxes, the whole issue of allocation of risk, the whole issue of ability to manage. And so the issue of DEMPI is going to come in. Who developed the intangible? Who is enhancing the intangible? Who is exploiting it? Who is promoting that intangible? So we're going to have to break this into the specific functions that had been performed by each entity within the value chain to be able to say, this is where your own activity starts and stop, then that is where your benefits should also start and stop. So, I mean, that is all about intangibles. Same goes for allocation of risk. And again, in order to encourage all of us to comply, and particularly to protect those of us who are committed to compliance, the government also introduced administrative penalties, which again, we also went to the market to say, okay, what is going to be reasonable? And of course, based on our work, based on our researches, we have come up with these administrative penalties as an encouragement for compliance. And they have to do with actual compliance, timeliness of compliance, correctness of information. All of these are covered. And then the TP documentation provisions were completely rewritten. For example, we have brought in threshold. We know that it costs a lot to develop TP documentation. We know it's very costly. And so what we have done is to say, if you have control transactions of less than 300 million naira, which is about $3 million, don't bother. Don't bother. If we then need you, they will tell you, we'll give you a longer time to get it. So don't bother with contemporaneous documentation if your control transactions are less than 300 million naira in value. But if you have control transactions above 300 million naira in value, you must do contemporaneous documentation. A caveat: if your turnover, if your control transaction exceeds 300 million and you bring it down below so that you will not do TP documentation, only let me get to the penalty side, then you will see the risk you are trying to run. Now, the TP documentation includes production of a master file The master file looks at the group, looks at the M&A at the group level. Who are the owners? What is the structure? What is the business? Who are the entities? Where are they located? What are they doing? All those group issues is what we're talking about in the master file. And then we have the local file, which is looking at the subsidiary, the company that is in Nigeria, looking at the transactions in detail, looking at the relationship in detail, the structure of that entity in detail, the departments in that entity, the persons, the key persons there. Those are the things that the local file will be speaking to. It's a little bit much more detailed and looking at smaller units of the M&A, where the master file looks at the big picture. Okay. Now, apart from those things that were not in the old regulations that we have brought in, there are a few enhancements that we have done to the document. For example, it's a very beautiful piece. I mean, when you look at it, it actually looks beautiful. The language is simplified. I mean, we try to run away from, apologies to lawyers. Lawyers can write one sentence to cover a whole page. We try to run away from that, make the sentences as simple as possible. We all know that transfer pricing is a complex subject in itself. So we can start simplifying it by simplifying the rules, putting them in simple language. And then it's elegant. I'm not a lawyer, but somebody talked to me about elegant drafting. So, okay, so we can say it's elegant. But what specific improvements do we have there? And clarity that it has brought to transfer pricing is, number one, now we have stated clearly the use of statistical approach in determining our arm's length range. And many people, when we talk about the arm's length range, the interquartiles, and people begin to argue and say, what are you talking about? So we said, no problem. Let's put it clearly in the rules so that it enables us to understand, even though that is a practice worldwide, but in order to avoid controversy, let's put it in the rules. Now, we have separate rules for TP declaration and disclosures. Again, in the old rules, these were modules together and was difficult for people to understand. Now, it's very clearly stated that TP declaration is a one-off thing you do, unless there are needs for you to make changes or whatever it is where you notify of changes. Whereas TP disclosures are yearly, they are recurrent. Every time you have transaction with your connected person, you must make disclosure on a yearly basis. So we have simplified that and make clear distinctions. Then we have also now have clearly rules for requesting for time within which to make compliance. What we have found is that when people come to us, they're supposed to file their returns, for example, let's say 30th of June, and then on the 29th, somebody writes you a letter and say, give me extension of time, I'm not able to file my returns. But this guy knows that he was going to file the return for 1 year. He waited until the 366th day or 365, depending whether it's a leap year or not, to come and notify you. So now we have rules dealing with time within which you can request for extension of time. Also, one of the issues that was very controversial in the whole rule was the issue of the decision review panel, where many people mistook it as usurping the right of the taxpayer to go to court, which was not the intention at all. Now, the decision review panel is meant to be an internal review mechanism. That is, before we will issue the notice of refusal to amend an assessment, we want to review it by ourselves and say, could we be right? Is there no point in what the taxpayer is saying? And we don't want that decision to be taken by the transfer pricing officers who did the work. We would rather let some people who are fairly independent of that decision to take a look at it, not with the microscopic eye of a TP analyst, but probably looking at it from the global picture. So this has been more clearly spelled out now, and of course the membership of the panel had also been expanded. And then we have clearer definitions. I think I should be nearing end now. This one, I mean, these are just the specific areas where we have those changes. I'm not going to dwell here at all. I just, for us to just look at those regulations that speak specifically to different things. Same thing, these are all those things that are there that we have changed, and where you will find them. Regulation 7, for example, deals with the role of intangible. And of course, yeah, let me just speak a little bit to this one. Royalty now for intangible is capped at 5% of EBITDA. Is capped before charging the royalty. I mean, you'll find this there. This is a very useful information. I think that's it. So this just all the things I've just told you. They are all here. Now, the big question now is, what is next? Where do we go from here? And that is to answer the question, how are we going to be doing this? One of the things we are committed to doing is to continue to engage with our stakeholders, to continue to explain our position, get your feedback, review ourselves where we are found wanting, and continually improve the system. Audit is going to intensify. We are building more capacity, both in terms of numbers and quality. We're already working on the ground to bring up issue of electronic filing, so that really all your declaration and disclosures, you may not need to be bringing documents again to the FRS. We're already working on that. We are hoping that we'll be able to deploy that by the turn of the year. Enforcement activities are going to continue to ensure compliance. And of course, guidelines, we're going to churn out. I mean, very soon we're going to publish the documentation guidelines, DP documentation guidelines. We're already working to develop the Safe Harbor guideline, the APA guidelines. I mean, we are working on all of them. We are revising the guidelines on filing of returns. Before the end of this year, we want to see how many we can push out, so that let there be that free flow of information and communication, and then we take it up there. And of course, like I said, the updating of the regulation itself has started again with us. And so if there are some thoughts you have, please, you can channel them to us, and then we'll look at them. So let's now close by looking at this couple. I'm just a fan of cartoons, and David Adekola of Vanguard happens to be I am one of his fans, so I follow all his cartoons as much as I can. But look at this wonderful woman. Is the wife talking to her husband. Said, the girl on the ground floor asked after you. And when I demanded what for, she became rude. Said, I want to know if you wrote the script she acted. Probably this guy is a producer, maybe a music or a movie producer. So the guys, did you write the script that she acted? And a very wonderful husband and loving one said, don't burst a blood. Don't burst a blood vessel. You are the leading actress in my life. Any other woman is a wakapas. Then, what do I say? You might have heard many things about the new transfer pricing regulation. Relax. You are the center of gravity of the FRS. If you see us dancing, we are dancing because of you. What we have done is in your best interest. God bless you.
Moderating the panel conversation. It's great to see that the room is very full. I think it speaks to the level of interest on the topic. And thank you so much, Mr. Bodibola, for making us laugh at the end, because I think tax issues are very sensitive in these days. I recall speaking to a CEO not too long ago after the Lagos State government reviewed the land use charge. And I can never forget what she said. She was so livid. She was like, what type of rapacious policy is this? They will meet us at the polling booths. That's what she said. So obviously, you know that people are quite sensitive about these issues. But at the same time, as he said, it is a civil responsibility and it's also a corporate responsibility. So we look forward to engaging on these issues during the panel conversation. So I'm going to just right now invite all the panelists to take their seats. And I want to begin by again inviting Mr. Bojumbola to take his seat as well. Please feel free to take this seat right here. Please, can we put our hands together for him as he comes? And Dr. Josh Banfo, he will also be joining us. Please put your hands together for him. We're also having the head of tax West and Central Africa at Maersk, Sebastian Odima. He's also part of this. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Mofoluke Agbeyogi is a finance and tax controller for Splendor Professional Consults. She's also part of this. I'll be doing a more elaborate introduction before we start, but for now, let me just leave it there. Unfortunately, Professor Abiola Sani is unable to join us today, but he is very ably represented, and I'll be introducing him further later. Please welcome Lawrence Emeka Ihebie, who will be also part of the panel this morning. All right, so if I can take my seat, we have a couple of microphones. You can have this one as well, sir. And the challenge that I have this morning is that, we only have so much time. Mr. Bojumbola has also said he has to leave pretty early. So I was thinking while I was sitting there, how do I manage this? And I think at the end of the day, I have several things to manage here. I have to manage the panelists who have things to say. Of course, we'll have a great audience here who also want to engage the panelists. And I also have a list of questions that have been presented by those who registered online for this. So what I thought is that at the end of the day, I think I'm the least important person here. Let me just get right into all these issues, maybe starting with the panelists. So Dr. Banfo, I want you to just jump in right away and get your perspective. You've heard the really brilliant presentation, and I'm sure quite a few things have stuck out for you. So if you can just share your perspective on how we're moving ahead with this transfer pricing thing.
Thank you very much, Wally. I think
just check
I think if you look at the revisions made to the regulations and go back to the question I said, it's of more. Two aspects: 10 million, and 1% off some particular base. So if you're a group entity that you have a lot of control transaction, that 1% could lead to some significant amount. Now, I understand the rationale behind administrative penalties. They are supposed to drive behaviors in terms of compliance. But you also need to understand the behavior on the other side in terms of the tax administrators. We all know that determining whether a control transaction is meet arm's length or not is difficult. So there could be the tendency for tax administrators, rather than focus on why they are doing what they are doing, is just cherry pick in terms of applying penalties in order to meet their targets. So what I would urge, my very good friend to do is look at the potential adverse unintended implications of some of these administrative penalties. Stuff like access to information. We know we are part of a group of companies, and sometimes the information requested by FRS is supposed to come from a sister company offshore. Sometimes sister companies are not willing to make such information available because they don't fall under the jurisdiction of Nigeria. If you make such a request and I cannot make it available to you, there's a penalty for that, all right? But it's not because I willingly decided not to avail such an information. Such a penalty is inconsistent for me with the objectives because it can lead to some behaviors. If I'm a tax administrator, I'll intentionally ask you for a document that is going to be very difficult for you to provide, and if you don't provide, I'm going to apply the penalty. You understand? So when you come up with these regulations, you need to look at some of the unintended behaviors that can be contrary to the spirit of that particular provision. So those are some of the things we'll talk about.
All right, we'll come back to you to get your reaction to that. But let me introduce Sebastian very briefly before he contributes to this, because I think he has a very useful perspective to provide. So Sebastian is the head of Tax West and Central Africa at Maersk. He is responsible for the tax affairs of more than 40 Maersk companies within 20 countries in West and Central Africa. And in this role, he supervises tax compliance, strategy optimization, and, of course, transfer pricing, risk assessment of related party transactions, as well as tax advisory on any inbound investment into West and Central Africa. So he is very, very qualified to share some perspective on this point. And I think he raised a very useful example to consider here. A situation where you are constrained by the activities of maybe your parent company offshore. What's your view on the rules, and maybe on that point as well, and then anything else you'd like to share?
Okay, thank you so much. So happy to be here also. I think I was talking to Mr. Okero and said, at least for me, the fact that they are even revising it is a step in the right direction. We can talk about the changes that need to be made, and I feel most people share my sentiment that I have with some reservations on some provisions. But the fact that, like George mentioned first, is clarity on the documentation. Before different people believes this is what is required, another person tells you, no, this is what is required. And so there's no consensus in terms of documentation. But the revised one has the 3-tier as prescribed by OECD, and everybody's fine with that. Now, in terms of information, for example, like Josh mentioned, and Josh just echoed my thoughts, you may request for a document. It's a big organization. And in my organization, we operate in more than 138 countries. And then at times you are asking for information, and the person looking at it will like, this information takes, even normal changes in the organization takes at least 2 years for you to get there. And then you may have a case where you are requesting for an information and the person that is there is even on vacation, and they tell you, okay, you have to wait. So there are different constraints that you may have in that. Not that intentionally you don't want to provide for that. And so when, like you said, the unintended consequences, and the taxpayer, you're like, which I've seen in Africa, so sorry I have to say that. And somebody like, this is a low-hanging fruit for us, so just ask for this document, and then I'll issue the penalty, and I'm fine with that. And it becomes punitive, and then people are like, what exactly are we talking about? So for me, that's just it. I know, understand, Mr. Bonchibola will tell you that at times some people do that on purpose, but also at times there's some right motive behind that, not that you set out not to provide the document. I might say, okay, maybe I may have to request for an extra time, not that you will not provide the document, but maybe an extension of time to provide for that. And for me, that's just one of the other parts. At least if I have to comment on that.
Yeah, great point to make. And I guess this brings us to the issue about the legality of some of these provisions. So maybe it's a good time to hear Lawrence Emeka, the APA's perspective on this. And before he speaks, I just want to do a brief introduction. He's a seasoned tax lawyer who specializes in tax law and tax practice. He has a bachelor's degree in law from the University of Ibadan and a master's in law from the University of Lagos, where he's also currently pursuing a doctorate degree. He's involved in tax advisory, corporate commercial practice, training, and corporate litigation. He has advised both local and offshore clients on diverse legal issues, including foreign direct investment, regulatory compliance, taxation, banking law, etc. So, is the FIRS do they have, what's your perspective, let me put it this way, to rephrase the question, on the legality of some of these provisions? And maybe you can share also more broadly your perspective on the revision. Yeah, go ahead, it's working. No, it's not working. Can you check? Maybe you should just switch mics.
Okay, maybe I can start with the penalties itself, since it's the bonding issue. Now, the regulations were made pursuant to some provisions on the main tax law. Let's not forget that the regulations themselves.
Sorry, I just want to be sure that they can hear you. They are struggling to hear you. The microphone is not working. If we can get some help, technical help here, so that we ensure. Okay, it is. I think they've just raised the volume. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, as I was saying, the regulations they are what we call subsidiary legislation, which means laws that were made by those who ordinarily are not meant to make it. So they derive their powers from somewhere. Now, the rule is this. For you to enact a subsidiary legislation, it must be in accordance with the main law. Take example, Company Income Tax Act and FIRS Act, which is the law from which the FIRS derive the power to make the regulations. Now, for them to make it, whatever rules they make must not derogate from the FIRS Act. Now, the question is this. The penalties, there is 25 million, there is 10,000 naira and 25,000 naira for each day of default. Can we find it? Because at the end of the day, what they are penalizing is failure to submit documents. Yeah. The same thing, there are provisions in the main law that provides for the power of the FIRS to ask for documents. It's simply the same thing. So he's just calling something the same thing in a new name. So what are the penalties provided in the main laws for failure of a taxpayer to provide these documents? They are there. And I don't think there is anything like 25 million for failure to provide 2-page documents that may be coming from, like he said, from Seychelles to Nigeria. It may take days. Or maybe from Australia to Nigeria, it may take days. And you ask me to pay 25 million. So the question is this: does the FIRS have power? I think we need to interrogate that, And examining the whole regulations themselves. Now, like George Bamford started, he said, why? There must have been some issues. There must have been some challenges that were identified in the old regulations that must have prompted the FIRS to make the new one and decide to revoke the old one, do away with the old one. So for us to examine these new ones, we have to ask ourselves certain questions. What are these mischiefs? We call it mischiefs in law. You look at what was in existence before. How did we try to cure it? The new one that we are doing, have we been able to cure it? So is this new one, has it been able to cure the mischief that was inherent in the old regulations? Now, for example, you look at the size of the two regulations. I have the old one here. It's about 19 pages. And 19 pages is about 19 regulations of about 14 pages. Now, both the regulations and the forms. There are forms at the old, behind the old one. Now, the new one is about 28 regulations of almost 40 pages. Without the forms. Without the forms. Now, the forms themselves form part of the regulation. And the new one revoked the old one. Now, when you revoke, you also revoke the forms. So the question is this: if I fail to file the declarations, or because in the new ones they say you must file based on the forms as prescribed by the FIRS. Now the forms that we have prescribed have been revoked. So if I fail to file the new one within the time, you come and you tell me I am late in filing, pay 25 million. The question is, sir, there were no forms.
We had no forms.
We have no forms.
No forms to file.
So that is another thing we have to look at. And I have some other issues here. For example, from the beginning, they listed the laws. One of the laws listed is VAT. And in my own opinion, I don't think it's necessary. It's not necessary. I don't think VAT as a law itself has really much transfer pricing issues that we should be concerned about. Then also the definition of the connected person, I believe, is too wide. If you follow that definition, it means that your bankers too are connected, because their actions, whatever they do, influence your economic decisions or even your political decisions. So we need to streamline it. I think the old regulations which provided to us, because we have legal definitions of connected person, we have them in CAMA, we have them in even the laws, the tax laws, and we cannot go outside it. If the tax law says this is the connected person, this is how you determine it, you cannot go outside it and begin to import this. And I'm only bound by what the law says. Remember, tax is statutory. You can't go outside it. So I commend the FIRS. They tried at least to tie payment with substance. That's what I was telling Mr. Bojibola this morning. Payment with substance. That is it. But in doing that, I think they also went a bit overboard, if I may say that.
All right.
And lastly, I started by asking some pertinent questions. Maybe if there was a kind of public participation at the time the regulations were being incubated, perhaps we may not be asking this question. There may be, a kind of opportunity for wider input. We may have ended up having maybe more concise regulations, more focused regulations, stakeholders, because remember the taxpayers too are the stakeholders. So maybe
there was no stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, really. They should borrow from SEC that normally expose their rules and all those things. These are many, and some other ones are my observations.
Okay, great. No, we'll still certainly allow Mr. Bojibola to respond, but before he does, I do know that he has to leave shortly. I want to get someone else on the panel to share her perspective as well. And just to introduce her, she's the Finance and Tax Controller, again, as I mentioned earlier, at Splendor Professional Consults, a seasoned professional with over 22 years experience in the area of finance, treasury, and tax management. She has extensive experience in the FMCG industry, and specifically, she has worked as the head of tax, East and West Africa for Cadbury Nigeria, and also as the corporate finance controller for Suntory Beverages and Food. So she has incidentally played on both sides, because prior to this, she worked at the FIRS for 11 years, where she rose to the position of assistant manager. So, Foluke Agbenyogi, my apologies. I want to hear your thoughts, because you've sat on both sides. So, in a sense, you have a unique view on this sensitive issue of tax regulation. What's your perspective on the new rules?
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity. You try not to murder the name, so I give it to you. Okay, funny enough, I stand to differ from my other colleagues, and that is because I feel this review is long overdue. For 11 years, I've been on the side of FRS before I pull out. I think about the youngest that retired so far in the history of FRS, and I've put in 11 years in taxpayers' affairs at the public and private sector as well. So I have seen a lot. I have been hot since 2012 when the TP regulation came into being. A number of loopholes that we had in that 2012 regulations. I'll create a scenario. Mr. Bojibola ended with a cartoon, a joke. But I will just play this scenario for you, where you sit here in Nigeria, and somebody out there at the group level have to make call, just link discussion with you for like 30 minutes to ask you, so how are you today? What do you have on your plate? Okay. You are the one telling this person everything you are doing. And all he's doing is, okay, right. And at the end of the day, we ask, okay, so what you have on your plate, how do you want to address it? You still provide responses, what I want to do. Say, okay, So make sure you keep us posted when you are done. And so at the end of the quarter, you get a bill on Nigeria. Is that fair? That's the truth. And so you get a bill that will say for technical support. Then the question is, has there been any support? What value has this guy added to talking to me? Even when you come together as group level and you are discussing, you see that this person is like 10 years far behind you without experience. These are part of the loopholes that FRS ought to have addressed long before now. In one of the companies that I have worked, and of course, for some people that still talk to me for advice on private level, you will see that things are not just right. Why should we allow our capital to be taken away just like that? Oftentimes we are not talking because we are employees. We are being paid to do that job. But the truth is, you and I know the truth. We know that things are not right. So these loopholes ought to have been blocked before now. Honestly, I dropped my car for FRS for coming out this way. Not because I've been part of them for 11 years, but because we need to grow. We need to harmonize. We need to do what other developing nations and developed nations have done. We cannot continue the way we were going. We need to utilize the resources that are being generated here to develop our nation. We cannot continue to borrow. In terms of pricing, items that could be sourced in other markets, and you know the prices, because the prices were not capped in the 2012 regulation. The parent company can decide at what price is going to sell to you in Nigeria. The fact that you are black does not mean your brain is black. The truth has to be told. And if somebody is telling me that somebody is on leave, for crying out loud, nobody goes on leave for more than 25 days in a year. Now the regulation is out. Can we plan? Whoever failed to plan is preparing to fail. So plan ahead, get your master file in place, get the local file in place, such that when they are called for, have them on your archive on the server. When they are called for, you pull it out and you submit to the revenue. You want to go for equity, go with clean hands. If you don't have anything to hide, there shouldn't be any excuse like they are not giving you from the region. Why is somebody sitting on earnings in the region? I agree with the notion that the penalties are huge, yes. 25 million, 20 million is massive. But they are meant to serve as deterrent so that there will be compliance. For some of us that are familiar with what happens in other countries of the world, that travel, can you violate and you are saying, I beg, in UK? No. Can you go to Italy and even beat the traffic, ordinary traffic? Before you get to your home, motor will be waiting for you. Fine. Will you say, I beg? No. Let us do things right. This is long overdue, and I say, well done to FRS. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bojibola, you certainly have an advocate on the panel. No doubt. All right. Okay. So I'm going to allow you to respond to some of the issues that have been raised before I take this to the audience and also address some of the questions that have been sent earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, this is the time I dread most. Incidentally, I was not putting on any bulletproof jackets. Howbeit, I still want to thank my panelists, my co-panelists, for their thoughts. And sincerely, I believe they are very wonderful thoughts, because we have to say things from different perspectives, and then it helps us to move forward in the right direction. Let me start with the issue of legality, which my very good friend had raised. Let me also assure you that we also consider this. And the regulation you have seen out there is not a product of FRS alone. Those of us who are lawyers, you know that you can't publish anything that is supposed to be, whether secondary or primary law, without the input of Federal Ministry of Justice. It's not possible. They're actually the final authority. And so all of this had gone through that check to say, is it legal? Do we have the legal cover to do this? And this is, for you to have it there means that it passed that test from those who should know. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, and because my belief is that every lawyer should be given, put in t-shirts and driven to Siberia. Now, as to 25 million fine or penalty, are you sure we have a 25 million penalty there? I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
10 million too.
So, because since I had 25 million, I've been racking my head.
Okay.
Where is this money? Where is this money? So there is no single penalty there that is 20 million. There's no 15 million there. The highest one there is 10 million.
Okay.
Good. Now, what is the mischief? And it's a very good question. Now, when I see this, what looks like a crowd, I really was touched. I really was touched that there are Nigerians who are willing to comply. I mean, my good friend here knows what it charges to do you a TP documentation. I don't know it. But he knows what he does, how much it charges you to do a TP documentation. Now, let's assume that my brother and I were in the same kind of business. Our turnover is about the same level. But you look at him, he looks very gentle, he looks very angelic. So he's a very compliant person. So when we say do contemporaneous documentation, he goes to Banfo and says, Banfo, do me documentation. And this guy gives him a very big bill. Me, I'm the typical one. So what will they do to me? And then they ask us to submit documentation. I don't have anyone to submit. He has paid big money to get his own submitted. And then the law caught up with me and slaps me on the wrist and said, don't do it again, just go away. Have I been fair to this guy? Has it been fair to you? Many of you have let very important things in your office to come here this morning just because you wanted to comply. The guy out there who is minding his business, probably making more money than you are now, because you are here, you're not making money. Should the law have spared him? That is the question. I know somebody can say, oh, there's no morality in law, but I also heard that when you also make law, it must not be repugnant to natural justice. So any law, therefore, that's supposed to be made that is not made, is also condoning things that are not up to, not promoting natural justice. So, I mean, that's just for us to put the numbers in perspective. I mean, the 10 million naira, probably if Banfo charges any less than 10 million for a TP documentation, maybe little change you are going to collect. Maybe. So the intention, therefore, is if you have not complied, you shouldn't have an advantage over the man who had complied when you are caught. And definitely we are going to catch you. So it should actually be a regret and say, oh, probably I should have just paid 6 million for this thing and I will be home and dry. That is the reason in our head in setting those numbers. They were not arbitrary. We went to the market and said, what does it cost to do a TP documentation? And then set the penalty around that range so that you are not making any gain by not complying. Forms were revoked. Not true, sir. In the 2012 regulations, we had forms appended to it. But we didn't even use that form for one day. Those of us who are in practice, we know that even those forms that were appended were not used for one day. Not a single return was filed with that, because just like everything that man does, you do it and then you say, oh, I could have done it better. And so before we even started, we saw flaws in those forms and we redesigned them and were communicated to taxpayers. And so people have been using that form. Even that form, we have revised it again and again. And if it is something that you are going to be revising, why do you want to cast it in stone? Which was why the regulation says it will be as prescribed by the service from time to time. So, indeed, sir, there are forms.
Thank you.
That are being used. Now, why reference to VAT? Yeah, I also first thought that transfer pricing has nothing to do with VAT, but it's not entirely correct, sir. Because there could also be adjustments relating to turnover that affects VAT. And I think if you look at section 15 of the VAT Act, if I recall properly, also told us that where there are transactions and we are arguing about the price, go and use the market value. What is he saying? The arm's length price. Public participation. We may not have had a room filled with people this many, but this product was not a product, like I said, of FRS. Including practicing firms, Anderson tax may not be there, but there are other firms representing the body of taxpayers. At least I remember there were 3 very popular firms who sent in representative at the drafting level, not even at review, to sit down to draft. And like I said to you, the business of taxation, we don't conduct it on the pages of newspaper. So it's actually not exactly true that there were no participation from the private sector. There were participation, but everybody could not have been accommodated at the table. Otherwise, we will never move forward. Now, with the very first comment of my good friend and Sebastian, as to the issue of the penalties attached to non-provision of documents, just a few things I'm going to say here. Number one, are we talking of members of the same family, or are we talking about strangers? That's question number one. Yeah, your brother could be in Seychelles, your uncle could be in Russia, but you are still a member of the same family. Number one. Most often, even all the profit you make here will still end up with that same person. Because don't forget, most often you only have minority shareholders in Nigeria. The majority shareholders are there. So what you are doing here is actually affecting the profit there. So it is not true to say, after all, the entity there is not under audit. I can tell you it is under audit, because the result of the Nigerian operation is going to be consolidated wherever they are. So it is in the interest of that guy to provide that information. Number 3 is that if you look at the regulation itself, I think it's regulation 14, provides for extension of time. Only that there are conditions. And what are the conditions? You must make your request before the due date. And of course, we are already working on a guideline which is already going to be published very soon, to tell us even operation of that. So you have good reasons why you are asking for extension of time. Inform this FRS. The FRS will look at your reasons and communicate to you and say, okay, yes, we agree with you, we give you this additional time to do so. But just like Mufuluka said, how many people take 2 months holiday in any of our multinational companies? It's gone on holiday for 2 months. I'm not sure. But you still see people asking for extension of time, 5 months, 6 months. I got one yesterday, last week. We said, I will tell you when I can provide it. It's not, I don't know whether you get what I'm talking. It's not even say I'm going to give you in year 2020. He said, I will give you when I'm going to give you. It doesn't even have a time in mind when he's going to provide it. And we are talking about connected persons. No, I'm not asking about your customer or your suppliers. Your member of your own house. So if it is that difficult for you, a member of the house, to get information, then what do you expect of a third party who is not part of the family, who doesn't even know who to call? And now, let me also say to us, that again, it is all about being fair to all. And it's not everybody that does like that. There are many companies, some of them are seated here or represented here. You request for an information or a piece of information, they go to any length. If they are going to miss the time, they call you, they send you mail, they say, please, we are working on it. You yourself, you don't need to be, you must be the real devil for you not to understand that this guy is actually genuinely working to get this piece of information for you. But there are those you will write and say, okay, can you give me this information, so date. After the date has expired, you now see a letter on your desk asking for extension of time. I saw one, the letter was dated after the expiry of the notice. It was that unsmart. He didn't even date it that same day. Put a date after the notice you gave had expired. That is impunity. We shouldn't live by that. We must move our system forward. I think, let me stop there for time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you addressed most of the issues very well. Yes, please, you can give him an applause. I think he certainly has done justice to that. Okay, so what I want to do now is to throw this open to the audience. So if you do have questions or comments, okay, I can see quite a few hands. And I'm going to need some help to get the microphones. Well, should we start from the front? We have somebody here already. Okay, so what we'll try and do is please introduce yourself very briefly, and please be sensitive to the fact that others who also want to contribute. So make it very, very brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bojubola, for the eloquent way you've presented this very difficult area. And I think I agree completely with your presentation and with what Madam said. We need to get serious on this area. However, we need to look at our environment. So you've indicated these fines or penalties. And what has happened in the past is that the officers have now seen the benchmark you've set. How are we going to be sure that we've not created a loophole for them to now make money defending the people that they're supposed to be penalizing? At the end of the day, those same people will pay less than the people that have paid undersea tax, and they will get away with it. So how are we policing the police to ensure that things are done properly?
A very strong point. I want to take a couple more. And please, as you are asking your question, please, let's go to the back, please. Okay, let's take one from here, please. And then after that, we'll come to you, sir. Please be very brief. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the presentation so far, and the panelists. I think it's been an amazing presentation. My comment is to the tax payers, actually. I think what FRS has presented has been amazing. The modifications, it shows that there have been some thoughts put into this. My contribution is to the taxpayers, actually. We have to be realistic at this point. It looks like TP has come to stay, and there's nothing we can do about it. For those that operate in group companies, and which is why we are here anyways, I think it's very important for us to communicate these changes at the group level. We need to let them understand that this thing is happening in Nigeria and it is real. It has come to stay. And we have to make it real. We need to let them understand that. I'm sure for most group companies, Nigeria plays a very important role. Nigeria is not usually taken very lightly when it comes to companies that have branches in Nigeria. And when a request comes from Nigeria, in most cases, it's not taken very lightly. Yeah. So we need to let them understand that this thing is happening in Nigeria. It is real. It has come to stay. So when these kind of requests come from Nigeria, you need to take it seriously. Right. So we shouldn't take it lightly at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the gentleman at the back, please. He has been raising his hand for a while. Yes.
Hello. My name is Soraju Iwale from 7 Energy. Part of my question was asked by the lawyer earlier, but Mr. Abiojubola did not answer it. It has to do with connected persons. If another company has, let's say, 5% stake in my company, how does that constitute control or influence? Why is it captured in the definition of your connected persons?
Okay, thank you. Let's take one more from the back, and then we'll get some responses and come for another round.
Good morning. My name is Uche Wadoka. I work with OER. Thank you again for the very illuminating presentation. I just want to reemphasize what Lawyer talked about, but it appears the response gave didn't exactly address what the concern is. So the firms don't represent just the taxpayers. You know, I'm sure Anderson, KPM, Janko represents the FRS as well. So they are neutral, you know, in the scheme of things. So when we say we want more participation in the process through which these regulations are issued, we want the taxpayers, the companies, to be involved. You know, if we can write to the individual companies, there are company bodies like OPTS, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, and Co. You know, so we really need to be more involved so that, I mean, we're the ones that bear the brunt of the regulations. We pay the taxes, you know, so you'd like to hear from us so that we don't start contesting it after it's been issued. But this is a step in the right direction. I'm happy that there are plans to review it already. So you get our comments, you know, at some point. But we recommend that for other regulations, please, let's be carried along before they're issued.
Okay, great point. Okay, let's get Mr. Akwajubola to respond.
Okay, thanks very much for those questions. Sir, I understand your point as to penalty that could become a money-making venture. But I can tell you that that will be in the FRS of yesteryears. I mean, those who work with us now know that that can't happen again. Not only that, we have specific rules in transfer pricing. And my colleagues, some of my colleagues there, they work in and out of our offices, so they know the way the office runs. And that does not run around an individual. I mean, it's just a whole system that we have running in that place. So it is almost impossible, I mean, for anyone to cheat on this, because there are layers of checks. So it's not just Bonjubola as an officer looking at your face and say, I don't like this guy, go and pay. I like this guy, don't pay. It doesn't work that way.
No, but when the request is made,
yes,
and
even you're making a request, you don't make a request alone. Your request also even go through layer. If somebody's going to vet you and say, look, this request doesn't look reasonable, take it back. So we have systems that run that way for transfer pricing. I can assure you that. Then with respect to communication, I agree with you. We need to have more and more communication. And I want to also encourage those of us who are in this room, let's also communicate to our people. We need to comply. What we need is I'm not interested in the penalties. The FRS is not interested in the penalty. Government does not want a penalty. We just want you to comply. But if you don't comply, we will take the penalty, you will still comply. The penalty is not a substitute for compliance. You don't comply, we will still collect the penalty, we will still make you comply. So then why don't you just comply and move away and forget about the penalty?
Yeah.
Then on definition of connected persons, I think the definition we have there, yeah, I had what my colleagues say that it is rather wide. But in transfer pricing, and Josh is here, he probably knows much more than I do in transfer pricing. There are rules, there are principles. Even where I look you, I mean, where it appears we have rules there, there are also rules within rules. So I think we should not look at the literary interpretation we give to legal issues. I mean, we had this problem even with our own lawyers. because they always look at things mostly from the criminal and the civil rules that we have. No, when it comes to taxation, it's a different ball game. I mean, I'm sure you know that in criminal justice, it is who alleges that must prove. But it's reversed in taxation. But even in you reversing that, there are also rules, because it can still come back again to you as a tax authority. So there are rules, sir. So please be rest assured that this one is not going to be a net that has no end. No, there are rules within transfer pricing for interpreting even those rules. And then I think that's it.
I think so too. Okay, I want to go back to the back, and then I'll come to the front. So please, if you can give the next person, yes.
Good morning. My name is Adebayo Duwale. I just want to get a further clarification. I will be addressing Mr. Bojubala directly. My clarification is on CBC reporting.
Yes.
In a scenario where we have a parent company who has probably complied in his jurisdiction, and the subsidiary in Nigeria has not complied. So I want to ask, is it mandatory for the subsidiary here in Nigeria to comply, to file the CBC reporting, or just to notify FRS?
Okay. All right. Please be very brief, because we really want to take more questions.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Oluwashola Ganiyu. Yeah, I have two concerns here. Number one concern is about the cap on intangible. If FRS could put a cap on intangible, what happened to NOTAP? So there will be a conflict.
NOTAP?
Yes, NOTAP. And also for valuation, FRS says that after customers valued a commodity, they will revalue it. Then what happened? They will leave the taxpayer to suffer. So how do we clarify this, and how do we secure the taxpayer from suffering from two tax jurisdictions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Please, if we can come to the front, let's just mix it up a little bit. Please, let's come to the front. Let's go up to the front and take a couple more from here. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just have a quick question on imports of goods.
On the what, sorry?
Imports of goods.
Import of goods.
We have two bodies from the Ministry of Finance. One is the Customs, and one is the Transfer Pricing Department. And the goals of the Customs is always to have higher price of goods supplied by the company. And the purpose of transfer pricing would be to minimize the cost of the good imported. So how can we meet both?
I think it's linked to what the last person asked. Okay. Sorry? Okay, he really needs to take these responses now.
I'm sorry, let me just...
Okay, let's just have this one more, please. Because he, as he mentioned, he does have to leave shortly.
Okay, thank you. My name is Chukwu Kadibia Okoye, Coronation Merchant Bank. Just a quick one. In terms of relevance of the transfer pricing system, we have a group. When you have a group that is with all the entities domiciled in Nigeria, then the question becomes how relevant, because if you look at even your presentation, the spirit behind transfer pricing thinks global. I know that there may be instances based on group structure, there will be profit shifting even within the same tax jurisdiction. But my view is that why have we not conceptualized those conditions, tax holidays, those that are making tax losses, conceptualize those exemptions so that entities that really don't have any business complying with the elaborate documentation required in transfer pricing, we have those exemptions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much
all right,
for
please
that.
go ahead.
Just permit me, it's just that I'm under pressure to move out of here. The question as to compliance with CBCR, the basic rule is that the ultimate parent will file the CBCR in its own country or its own jurisdiction, and then the tax authority of that jurisdiction will exchange that with Nigeria. However, it is possible that for that parent company to be in a jurisdiction where there is no requirement to file the CBCR. If it's in such a jurisdiction, then the entity in Nigeria, under our rules, must file with FRS. So, and that is where the issue of notification comes in under Regulation 6, where as a group, you will notify the FRS who is the one to file in your group. So once you make that notification, then we know whether we are expecting from the local entity or from by exchange of information. With respect to the cap on royalty and NOTAP, we must understand that NOTAP was never set up as a tax authority. And that has been a major issue for us to understand. And I can also say to you that NOTAP and FRS are actually talking together to streamline things. I mean, I have personally had to even train them, talk to them about transfer pricing. So they themselves are already getting aware of the issues. Transfer pricing is based on arm's length principle. I'm not sure NOTAP goes through that whole process in agreeing a rate. So, I mean, that is just the dichotomy there, but don't worry, that has been resolved.
It's been addressed.
It's been addressed. Now, with the issue of customs valuation, why is FRS not accepting customs valuation? I think my friend here also alludes to that. You know that in taxation, basic principle for allowing costs is whether that cost had been incurred. If the cost had been incurred, then of course it has passed one threshold. But where valuations are done notionally, it's not based on actual cost. For example, there was a time in this country when you import a fairly used vehicle, they ask you what is the year. Then the custom used the year to put a value on it, irrespective of what price you have paid. That in itself has offended Section 24(1) of CITA. So, since tax is based on law, we can't deviate from what the law says, irrespective of who had made the pronouncement. So, that is why the issue of customs valuation is not binding, because most often it's not the real cost. The second issue is that when we are talking transfer pricing now, there is another rule which is talking about the arm's length principle. So these products, whether you are buying it into Ghana or you are buying it into Nigeria, if you are buying from the same place, it should command the same cost. Apart from other logistic costs that may now differentiate, maybe in terms of transportation, in terms of insurance, which can come in, but the basic cost must have been the same thing. But if some country now say, no, I want you to add another commission on it, which is notional, that has already distorted arm's length principle. So those are the two basic reasons why we cannot base our valuation on custom valuation. Again, I can also tell you that we are already also entering into discussion with customs on this issue. Thank you.
No, I think there were some other questions. Okay, you want to try and address that? Okay.
You know, it's important that we put this in perspective. You know, once again, I said you have to go back to the objective of this regulation. And I said that the objectives tends to basically, you know, protect this nation in terms of making sure that we don't take money out unnecessarily. And so that is clear, and I don't think anybody has any dispute with that. All right, our objective is to comply, but there are three objectives that also protects taxpayers. That is the reason why we are here. We want to educate you on some of these provisions that could potentially have an adverse impact on you. All right, so let's go back to some of these examples and let's put them in perspective. When you have a situation where you set a ruling for the royalty that has to be paid, and meanwhile you have guidance as to how to determine the appropriateness of that royalty that has to be paid, which is based on the same principle that we've talked about, arm's length principle, why would you then set a cap on it? What that creates is double taxation risk. In fact, the country notorious for rulings in the world is Brazil. Brazil consistently had rulings, and that's the reason why they alienated themselves from the globe when it comes to transfer pricing. In fact, Brazil took that position because of its size. It was number 6 biggest economy in the world. So they couldn't care less. They felt like foreign direct investors are going to come in irrespective of the uncertainty associated with transfer pricing. Today, Brazil is suffering. The economy is not growing. What have they done? They've gone back to OECD and are negotiating with them to enter into the arm's length principle. So if we are going to learn, we need to learn in such a way that we don't create room for double taxation risk. There's an ongoing landmark case where US had determined that the royalty should be 5% of net sales, and Brazil, based on their ruling, was going to be way lesser. So who is going to bear the difference? US is going to make an adjustment based on arm's length principle. Brazil is going to take their position based on a ruling, and who suffers? The taxpayer. They say in that sense, when the two elephants are fighting, it's the grass that suffers. So the whole idea of understanding the objectives of these TP regulations is to understand that in achieving the aims of FRS and the nation, we don't let the taxpayer suffer. Another example to that effect goes to the same example that my good friend from Daniel came up with custom duties. Whether you like it or not, it's the same economy we are talking about. And so if custom using a notional approach then determines that the price should be high, and FRS using arm's length principle determines that the price should be low, and they make an adjustment, all right, who is being double taxed? The taxpayer. There should be a mechanism that addresses such issues, because the objective of this regulation is to make sure that taxpayer doesn't suffer when we are applying our arm's length principle. Let's go back to NOTAP. There are a lot of services, technical fees, management fees that are legitimate. We cannot say that almost every support is supposed to be fictionary. No. Truth be told, we have Nigerian companies that are now expanding to other jurisdictions. You can talk about the Dangotes of the world. Are we going to beat our chest that Dangote didn't support other subsidiaries for them to also do well in their jurisdiction? I'm sure if you audit them, you're going to expect some payment coming in. So when we talk about some of these things, we are talking about substance, all right? The purpose is to make sure that first and foremost, those benefits do exist. Those services actually happen. But what we are saying is that it shouldn't be the case that we suffer when we try to comply. Let's take NOTAP. NOTAP uses its own rule of thumb to determine the amount of technical fees that you have to pay. Now you have this. FRS has arm's length principle. The two are not talking to each other. So if I'm preparing a TP documentation for my client, I don't know whether to go with NOTAP approved rates or to go with arm's length principle. We go through an audit process. FRS then can pick and choose which of the rates to go. I will bet you that where the outflow is higher, all right, in some cases, all right, then FRS will choose a particular option, a NOTAP approved rate. In some cases, the cherry picking itself is something that is inconsistent with the way this arm's length principle should be implemented. So we do agree with the spirit of these revised regulations. There are good things in there, and we really appreciate it. And there's a lot of clarity, and we love it. But in the areas where it leads to double taxation risk to taxpayers, and as he rightly said, and I agree with him, it's a work in progress. It's up to you to understand the why, which is objectives. Then go back to those revisions and see whether those revisions are in line with those objectives. That is the only time that you can have a very candid conversation as to whether we can make changes. NOTAP approved rates, we need to find a way for all those government agencies to talk to each other. If you go to South Africa, for you to make a payment out, you need foreign exchange from the central bank in South Africa. But the central bank in South Africa will ask you for your transfer pricing policy, all right? Which means that they are using the same arm's length principle to determine whether you get access to Forex, and it's that same arm's length principle which will determine the tax treatment. So we are speaking the same language. Unfortunately, over here, each agency is speaking a different language. Custom is using notional approach, NOTAP is using rule of thumb, FRS is using arm's length principle, and later they introduce rulings. So those are the harmonization that are very necessary for us to make sure that taxpayers do not suffer double taxation risk. Thank you.
Okay, maybe just in making a closing remark. Thank you, Josh, and thanks, my colleagues. Just one simple clarification here is the fact that in FRS, and he had experience with us, he had a number of transfer pricing audits with us. I'm not sure he can point out to a single case of cherry picking by FRS. I'm sure. I'm sure. I'm sure. There had never been one, because we stand by the principle of arm's length. So if it confers more advantage on you, so be it. If it does not, so be it. And that is what we are in the FRS. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, so please can we put our hands together again for him joining us? Okay, sorry, just before you leave, sir, if you do not mind, we want a group photograph. Please, just before you leave.
Sorry, while the group photograph is going on, a couple of announcements, please. If you check under your seat, there are bags in there. The bags are souvenirs for you, so as you go away, you can please take them along. In addition, I'm sure from this session, we can realize that a lot of changes have happened. These changes are going to impact how we comply with transfer pricing on a going forward basis. To this end, we're organizing a training program for taxpayers to understand how, in a proactive manner, they can take cognizance of these changes in how they prepare their transfer pricing compliance documentation. The training is supposed to come up on 24th of October 2016, and it's going to be happening at this venue. A flyer to that effect, it's inside the park. Also, we're organizing a brief survey just to understand the impact of these regulations. The questionnaires are going around. Please kindly take a few minutes to complete them and drop them at the table. On this note, we want to thank everybody for finding time to be here. Thanks, and looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you.